Welcome to the Beno travel guide to Paris. And the reason why I'm making these travel guides is I've noticed there's a lot of travel guides on YouTube and on the internet. They always go on about visit this museum. Oh, you have to visit this famous site. The worst ones are ones for London. There's so many travel guides to London that say visit Buckingham Palace and the House of Parliament. No! Do not visit Houses of Parliament and Buckingham Palace. They're shit. There's so much better things to see in London. So that's why I'm making this series of travel guides. So in this episode is the travel guide to Paris. And this is everything you need to know when visiting Paris. First thing is the price of it. Paris can be expensive if you're not careful, so you need to plan it a bit in advance. The Eurostar is fucking expensive. It's an insult that you have cheap flights which are bad for the environment and can be really cheap to get places, although Paris is not so cheap because the airports are so far out of Paris. But the Eurostar, an environmentally friendly way of travelling, and it's a ridiculous price. The Eurostar is an insult to transportation. It should be cheap and it's not, and it's really bad. It's the fact you can't have a train cheaper than an aeroplane is really wrong, but often you can find cheap deals. If you get a Eurostar and hotel deal, if you go to websites like lastminute.com, you can get it much cheaper than if you book from Eurostar's website. And in Paris, when you got a hotel, you have to pay tourist tax on top, so just remember to factor that in, that the price you see advertised is not the price you're actually going to pay. Then there's the price of eating in Paris. Now, lots of travel guides go on about restaurants and fancy food, and if you're not used to me, you might not know that I think fancy food is a complete utter waste of money. I recommend going to places like McDonald's, but in Paris, McDonald's is very expensive. It's almost as expensive as Switzerland. I don't know why Paris is so much more expensive. I even say it's more expensive than Germany. If you're on a budget, you might need to really think like I did in Switzerland and just go for things for most amount of food for least amount of money and really carefully plan things. Other than for cooked food, getting cold food is a lot more cheaper. For some reason, there's a real premium cooked food in Paris, but if you're getting cold food, the cheapest places to go to are Aldi and Lidl. Don't go to some of the other supermarket brands, because some of the other like really small supermarkets will rip you off. Don't think, oh, I need something to eat and then just go into some little tiny shop in the middle of town, because that'll be very expensive. But if you go to some big out of town supermarket, also it's Arken in France, which is a major chain, that's pretty cheap. Listen, just be aware that in Arken's, there's actually two sides to the supermarket. One side is super expensive and one side's really cheap, so make sure you're in the cheap side, because you're in the expensive side and don't realise it's two different sides. You'll be thinking, wow, everything's expensive here, but nope, it's just that you're in the expensive side of the supermarket. So then, what should you see when you visit Paris? Paris is a massive city and there's so much to do, and pretty much every travel guide on the internet says go to the Louvre and see the Mona Lisa. Well, guess what? In my travel guide, I'm going to be more honest than other travel guides, and I'm going to say don't see the Mona Lisa. It's a piece of shit. It's just some little painting which is famous for no proper reason, and it's not worth visiting. It's just silly museums. There's so much more interesting things to see in Paris. Now, the biggest tourist attraction is the Eiffel Tower. Although most of the time I don't really like tourist attractions that much, I'm quite critical of them because they're quite overhyped. The Eiffel Tower is kind of worth it, but you need to get there really early in the morning. The crowds are crazy. The Eiffel Tower is worth it because it's got some interesting funiculars, and the funiculars going up the Eiffel Tower are incredibly interesting. So they go up at one angle, then halfway up they then change to another angle, a steep angle, to go up the second part of the tower. But when they do this, the floor of the funicular doesn't tilt. The floor where you're standing in the funicular stays level the entire way, which is a really clever piece of engineering. And the Eiffel Tower is actually pretty much the only tourist attraction in Paris which is worth it. All of the others that everyone likes to go to, like is Montmartre, which I'd say avoid, and I'll come on to why you should avoid Montmartre a bit later. But one of the best things to do in Paris is walk around the streets. There's so many interesting things you'll see, and I find it's much more rewarding to just walk around the streets and then discover something really interesting which you never knew was there. And that just makes the trip so much more interesting than going to a set tourist attraction that's like set out for tourists to go to. And also, the main area of Paris, right in the middle of town, is Les Halles area around Châtelet, and that's a very interesting area. Lots of stuff. There's Les Halles shopping centre. There's things like the various sites like Pompidou Central, although you can get in the entrance for free. I personally wouldn't pay to go up it because all these things in Paris are very overpriced. And the number one thing which is most worth going to in Paris is, of course, the Paris Metro. It is not like any other metro system in the world. If you haven't already been to Paris, you might think of various different metro systems. Well, Paris is not like any of those. It's completely, utterly different, especially the rubber wheel trains. They accelerate so fast and often accelerate at around 4 miles an hour a second. They shoot out the station. They're extremely quick. Top speeds are not very quick, and the stops are very close together, so it makes it sort of like a bus on rails. It's hard to describe without actually going it and seeing it for yourself. You'll never see something quite like it anywhere else you travel travel to. So, the highlights of the Paris Metro, because the Paris Metro is absolutely massive, and you actually need at least 2 full days of just travelling the Metro to see all of the interesting bits, and you won't even see it all with 2 full days. You'll only see the interesting bits, and so there's so much of the Paris Metro to see. Here's my recommendations of the most interesting and unique sections of the Paris Metro which you should visit when you travel to Paris. Number 1 is Line 14. Line 14 is based on VAL technology. It uses Siemens automation, and the trains, although it's using VAL technology, the trains aren't made by Siemens themselves, they're made by Alstom. And the line, this works so efficiently. That Siemens automation is just perfect. It comes into the station really fast, the trains run really fast, although sadly they have slowed it down a little bit since the update of Siemens economy driving, which means the train speeds up but it just coasts along, then slows down, so you don't quite have the really fast effect. So it's not quite as fast as it was, but it's still very interesting. Also, there's Line 1, which is also now automated. This wasn't built dedicated as an automated metro, it's modernised from a regular metro, and it's quite interesting, but I would say Line 14 is probably more interesting. Also, there's Line 11, which has the oldest trains on the system, the 1959 trains, and these what I would consider the most classic of the Paris Metro trains. They shoot out the station so quick, and they go around the corners crazy fast. You have to hold on tight, because as you go around the corner, it throws you to the side. They are such fun trains. I do not know a train quite as fun as the 1959 train in Paris, and this, the way it's got rubber wheels, gives the train so much grip. It can just accelerate really fast, de-accelerate really fast, and it's got so much character to it. Also, you should visit Line 7B, which is the creepiest line of the Paris Metro. Here's some trains which didn't work very well. The trains were actually prototypes of a train with bendy sections between the carriages. The trains have some problem limiting them to 40 kilometers an hour, which is very slow, and it's actually pretty creepy because not many people use it, and the trains are a very creepy sounding VF. Also, there's Line 6, which goes on the overhead viaducts around past the Eiffel Tower, down to Montparnasse, then back up the other side of Paris along to Nation. And this line is one of the best lines because you get a nice view as you run along. And the trains are 1973 trains, which are fairly similar to the 1959, although very slightly less characterful, but still very interesting. Also, as well as these rubber wheel lines, which I've just described, there's also the steel wheel lines. The steel wheeled lines are not really quite as interesting, but it's still interesting and still worth going on. But remember, when you're visiting Paris, don't just visit the metro lines in the middle, because there's so many other lines around the outside of Paris. The metro in the middle is not everything, so make sure you buy an all zones ticket and travel right to the outskirts, because there's so many interesting bits, such as the trams. There's loads and loads of tram routes in Paris, but these trams do not go into the centre. So let's just go through which trams are the most interesting, because some tram lines are more interesting than others. Tram 1 is the oldest tram line with trams with DC pulse modulation. It's a bit slow. Tram 2 is very interesting because tram 2 has what I call duck trams, because they look a bit like a duck, and these trams have a section where they run along an old railway line and go really fast, and that's a really fun tram route. Trams 3A and 3B are shit boring. Do not go on these. They run painfully slow. Tram 4 is a pretty interesting tram. It's not that long, it's a bit out of town, but it's quite a nice tram ride. Now we get on to Tram 5, which is one of the most epic trams in Paris. It's not even a tram, it's a tram bus. It's a centre guided rail, and it runs on rubber tyres. It's such an interesting design of vehicle, and it has really fast acceleration. It is like nothing else. If you've not been on a tram bus before, I would highly recommend you take a ride on it, because it's such an unusual and interesting vehicle. Now, Tram 6. Tram 6 is also a tram bus, and also is just as worth going on because it's absolutely epic. Tram 7. Tram 7's a Citadis, and if you want to go on trams and want to do Tram 7, it's not really worth it. Tram 8. Tram 8 is also a Citadis. If you're really interested in trams, I recommend you go on all of them, but if you only want to get a selection of the different trams, I wouldn't go on the Citadis ones because they're not really as interesting. Stick to the interesting ones. And the last tram route is Tram 11 Express. This is definitely a good one to go on. It's really fast. It's a tram train route, and it runs along like mainline tracks. It's like a little tram route that sort of connects up various disjointed bits of the main line around the outskirts of Paris. It's a really interesting route and well worth going on. Also, while you're in Paris, make sure you go on the RER. If you're going to go on the RER route, go on the double-deck routes. So that's Route A and Route D. These RER routes are really long, and they're also extremely fast. They have long distances between stations, and the trains, despite being double-deck, which you think think might be a slow and heavy train. They're extremely fast, accelerating at 3 miles an hour a second, and they make an epic sound. Make sure you stand right at the very front of the train. The sound it makes is the best old Czech train ever is, and it has that classic, really heavy, over-engineered French feel. Also, go on the old creepy suburban lines, such as Transilian L. These are some extremely old trains from the 1970s, and they've old resistor start DC motors, and these trains are really creepy and are definitely worth a ride. Also, make sure you go right to the outskirts of Paris to ride the 2 Val routes. That is Charles de Gaulle Val up at Charles de Gaulle Airport, which runs Val 208s and is a very fun route, and also Orly Val, which runs Val 206s. So that is my recommendations for what trains you should ride while you're in Paris. Now on to safety. Now, loads of people in these travel guides say Paris is a really safe city and is as safe as any other European city. I completely disagree. What I find really shocking is I find Paris to be not very safe at all, really. I don't know why everyone says it's so safe. I find certain people in Paris can be pretty intimidating. And also, there's a lot of thefts in Paris. It's one of the biggest places for pickpockets, second only to Barcelona. There's pickpockets everywhere, so make sure you have absolutely nothing in your pockets, and make sure you have all of your valuables in your bag. And a lot of the time, wear your bag on your front of you rather than on the back of you, so you make sure your bag's right with you at all times and no one can get into it. Also, if anyone comes up to you asking if you can speak English, walk away immediately. No matter who they are, no matter if they seem friendly or not, anyone comes up to you, do not speak to them. They will be distracting you so someone else can pickpocket you. And now on to the absolute worst parts of Paris, which is the worst part, without a doubt, is Montmartre. Why does everyone think it's a nice place to go to? It's an absolute horrid place. If you walk up the stairs rather than take a funicular, you are non-stop hassled by horrible people trying to get money off of you. And the worst ones of these people, as you walk past, sort of try and grab you, but not quite grab you, but sort of tie a bit of string around your finger. Then they demand money for their services, and they get very aggressive if you don't give them any money. Also, you get people saying, have a beer, and they sort of try and give you a beer. And then as soon as you accept it, they then demand money in an aggressive way. So be very, very careful, especially around the Montmartre area. And also around the Eiffel Tower area is pretty bad as well. Also in the very centre of Paris can be pretty bad, but the worst area is definitely Montmartre. And also you get the horrible buskers on trains, which play music right in your face, then demand money off you. So just be careful. Paris is quite a rough city. It's quite a bit more rough than other European cities. It's definitely not the friendliest city you can be in. And also, most of the French people that live in Paris are pretty rude. Most of them are really sick of tourists, because Paris has so many tourists in, and that's a little bit understandable, but even the people actually working in the tourist industry are also really rude. Despite the fact it's their job to work with tourists, they get really angry if you don't understand them. And when they speak French, no matter if you try and learn French and get French lessons, the people in Paris deliberately speak French really, really fast, and they always miss off like the first and last letters of words, and they do it deliberately to make sure tourists can't understand them. And they do this just so they can call tourists dumb. Now, this isn't everyone. I'm sure there's loads of friendly people in Paris, but it is quite a big culture in Paris for people, especially people trying to sell tickets and stuff like that, to be rude to tourists. But despite all these things I just said, don't let that put you off going, because the metro is so interesting. It's worth picking up with all of the downsides. It's such an interesting metro system. So I really recommend you go and visit Paris. It's a really epic city.